Hey everybody, Professor Dust here, and today we're going to talk about power, influence, and leadership. So these are all three related constructs, but they are overlapping and different in important ways. So I want to flesh this out a little bit, and we'll start off by talking about power. And power has two higher order categories. Position power is the first one, and personal power is the second one. So first, with position power, there are dimensions of position power. The first dimension or category is another framing of the different types of position power, is legitimate power. And this is when someone has authority, and this authority is formal. It's built into the structure of some type of system, and it is readily clear, right? So President Biden, for example, has been, through the democratic process, given specific legitimate authority to engage in executive orders and have oversight on certain matters, and is in charge of the United States. Relatedly, a CEO of a publicly traded company like Elon Musk has legitimate power over the entities in which he's the CEO: SpaceX, Tesla, Solar City. And so it is legitimate in that it is formally constructed based upon some legal guideline. The second one is reward power. And reward power is this ability to distribute some type of reward, whether it's resources such as money, bonuses, more flexibility, better opportunities, whatever it might be. And one example for me is the dean of the Farmer School of Business. Jenny has reward power in that she oversees a process that is enabling merit increases, promotion, tenure, things like that. And same with my department chair, Dr. Aschenbaum. And so the two of them have this reward power because they are part of that process. And a lot of times in organizational settings, that supervisor or the supervisor's supervisor, like in this scenario, they are controlling the degree to which people are going to get certain things, whether it's opportunities or income, etc. And so an important point of this is to recognize that legitimate power and reward power, although they are correlated, they're not necessarily one and the same. So someone can have legitimate power but not have reward power, and someone could have reward power but not necessarily legitimate power. And it's probably more common to have some degree of moderate correlation, if not a high correlation on those two, but it's not completely overlapping. And then relatedly, kind of the opposite of reward power is coercive power. And this is basically the opposite. There's not control over rewards per se, but it's control over punishments, things that you can take away. You can fire somebody, you could demote somebody, you could choose to forego giving them bonuses or whatever it might be that is some valued resource. My favorite example is Coach K when he was the head coach of the USA basketball team, which was the dream team. It was just amazing and had all of these amazing players that together are combined making $1 billion worth of income, and they're all at the top of their game. And so, like, what reward really does Coach K have, this college basketball coach, and being on this one-time project, so to speak, of being the coach of this Olympic team? What authority does he really have? Well, the one big piece of authority that he has is coercive power. He can put them on the bench. He gets to decide whether or not they're out on that floor or not. And so this is a form of coercive power or control over the punishment. So coercive has a negative connotation, so I'm not a big fan of that word. But nonetheless, it is something that can be taken away, which does tend to be negative in connotation. The last type of position power is information power. So this is anything that you have access to that others might want, but it has to be in the form of information or data, some type of knowledge that you have that others might want. And you have this information because of the position that you're in. You have access to it and you can see it. You can glean insights from it that others can't because they don't necessarily have that position access. Great example, Eric Snowden being one of the most famous examples of a data breach where he worked for the CIA, and he jumped around for a variety of different places and had a background in being in this data management and security type position. And he was considered probably one of the biggest breaches, or maybe one of the most famous breaches of a whistleblower case, or arguably a whistleblower case. And there was, of course, two sides to every story. He was basically saying, hey, the public needed to know this information, and then the governmental entities saying they have this information for good reason, for utilitarian purposes, for protection of the company. But nonetheless, this is a great example of somebody that has information power. He has a lot of data, a lot of information in his purview that he had access to that people wanted, and it was very impactful and important. And that's an example of information power. The other category is called personal power, and personal power has it has less to do with the position you're in and more so to do with what you have internally and what you have in terms of individual characteristics, in terms of your capabilities, in terms of your skills, etc. And so another conversation about position power and personal power, they certainly do have some overlap. And maybe they are correlated to some degree, but again, it's not a perfect overlap in that you can have high personal power and absolutely zero position power, and vice versa. But typically there is some degree of overlap. So the first one, expert power. This comes from very specific and important, impactful access, or obtainment of expertise, skills, or knowledge. So one of my favorite examples is Sheryl Sandberg. She's the chief operating officer at Facebook and has been there a long time, was one of the earlier employees, came up through the engineering team, and she is, unfortunately, one of the very few executives for massive publicly traded companies. And this is something that is unique to her. So she is an expert based upon her experience and based upon her background and all of her knowledge, skills, and abilities about being in the C-suite, but as well, she has a unique insight because she is a female, and unfortunately, there's only 2 to 5%, depending upon which variables you're evaluating, of females that are in those C-suite of publicly traded companies. She has very specific expert power or expertise. And so she's created this nonprofit based upon her book, Lean In, and she created leanin.org that is helping people understand and leverage this information that she has. And so she would be an expert, and she has power based upon that expertise in that specific topic. Another personal power is referent power, and this is probably the fuzziest and the hardest to pin down because it comes from all sorts of different areas that then becomes this gestalt of people just want to be associated with some individual. So the best example I have is the Oprah Winfrey effect, right? Oprah Winfrey is a personality. She's talented. She has resources. She's well respected. So throughout all these different things that she does, maybe some of them position, some of them other types of expert power, together as a gestalt construct, she has referent power. People just want to be associated with her because of this combination of factors. And so, for example, Oprah's got a book club, and if she puts her sticker on there, then that book is almost guaranteed to be a bestseller. And it's because people refer to her and her expertise and her insight and her opinion. And a lot of times this will happen in organizations where there's just somebody that is kind of a force to be reckoned with. People defer to them. People want to work with them because of all of these different factors. And that's an example of referent power. So now power and leadership and influence, again, they're three separate domains, and they're three different things, but they do have a lot of overlap, right? So people that have power, whether it be position or personal, they have some degree of influence, and You can think of influence, though, as different types. You can kind of break it down and say, how are people influencing others? And so you might start to see some trends that some people influence others based upon control, and some others influence people based upon their expertise, etc. So here's a variety of different ways that you can influence others. Each of them, interestingly, has a downside. And so you should be aware of how you're influencing others and leveraging your knowledge, expertise, etc. And so the first one is coalition building. This is when you're enlisting the help of other people. So you might bring other people into the decision-making process and say, hey, are you with me? Do you agree with me? Okay, well, now we have power in numbers, and let's go push and advocate for whatever it is that we think is right. The challenge here is that there will always be political repercussions, because people might not like the fact that they've been outnumbered and you've built up this majority, and then they kind of feel like the minority in their position. So there can be some political repercussions of doing that. And then if you create this culture of coalition building, then you got a lot of backdoor politics going on, and that might not necessarily be healthy. Number 2 is consultation. So this is when somebody seeks out the advice of someone else and says, hey, I want to get your perspective, give me some feedback, and let's talk about what you think. Is this the right thing to do? And so you're engaging that person in the process to kind of get their buy-in. And now the challenge here is that if you're going to engage in consultation influence, because, hey, you want them to do something and you want them to be on board, and they're giving you some insight on what they think, you better be prepared to actually implement it. Because if you don't implement it, then they're just going to be super annoyed, because they're going to say, well, why did you even ask me in the first place? The third one is this idea of exchange. And so this is very transactional, and it would say, hey, if you do this for me, I'll do something for you down the road, right? So, if you come with me and you're on my side for this idea and you help me advocate for this, even though you might not necessarily care very much, I'll do the same for you when it's your turn, and we'll just kind of trade off in terms of supporting each other. And so the challenge here is that it tends to be at a high cost, because you don't know what they're going to ask you to do later. And so, is it going to be equivalent? More often than not, it might actually be something that you're not super interested in doing. And so you might get what you want today, but when it comes back to be your turn, you might be surprised. Another is ingratiation. This is just using flattery or praise to try and get people to pay attention to you, to warm up to you, to trust you. And certainly it's important to be polite, and it's important to be likable and build a relationship. The opposite of those things, being antagonistic is probably not a good idea, and being impolite is not a good idea. But ingratiation is kind of taking those niceties maybe to a different level and trying to get into the good graces by flattering people and complimenting them and things like that. And that's it's potentially good, but if you're falling outside of your authentic self, and it feels forced, it's not going to come across well. People's radar kind of goes off, and they're like, this seems a little cheesy. But also, it can backfire when it's used too late. So, if you're working with somebody, and you're really kind of down to that last yard to try and push something over the edge, and then all of a sudden you start, oh my gosh, you're so wonderful to work with, this has been great, I really appreciate all this, and it kind of comes out of nowhere, then it kind of backfires, because people are like, oh, well, clearly this person just wants this to happen at all costs. So you have to be careful with the degree to which and the timing with which you use ingratiation. And then finally, inspirational appeals. This is about appealing to people's values or people's ideals or people's long-term mission, right? So using inspiration can be helpful, right? People want to be a part of a cause that they believe in. They want to be a part of something bigger, and that's great. But the importance is that you have credibility when you're engaging in these types of inspirational appeals. For example, if you just start working for an organization, it's your first week, and you're on the first conference call with the entire team, and you stand up and make some big, inspirational message about what the team's going to do and how we're going to accomplish your goals. People are looking around and saying, who is this person? You just got here. You don't even really know what's going on, right? So you have to have some degree of credibility in order to actually engage in this inspirational appeal. And a lot of times this inspirational appeal tends to be something that a team leader or maybe somebody that's a little bit more experienced or has the power-oriented position The position power might leverage this a little bit more, but certainly inspiring others can be helpful no matter what your position is. Next is legitimating tactics. So this is essentially saying, let me remind you that within the hierarchy, I have formal authority. So please get it done. And that's fine if you absolutely have to use that tactic kind of as like a fail-safe to say, there really isn't any leeway in here. There's not a lot of decision flexibility in here. This is just absolutely something that has to be done, perhaps because the higher ups are telling me it has to be done and I'm just, relaying the message, or because I've already done my homework and I can assure you that this is something that absolutely must be done. Now, if you're going to use this tactic, if you're going to legitimate, you might want to use it early and kind of say, there's just unfortunately not a lot of discussion on this one. I like to be consultative. I like to, talk things through and get advice. But in this specific decision, I just have to make this call now, perhaps because of timing or context or whatever it might be. If you have conversations with people and you make it sound like it's more open, and then at the very last minute, you say, you know what, tough stuff, we're doing this. That's bad, because then that kind of rubs people the wrong way. Be honest with them up front if there really is no leeway in whatever the potential decision or direction is. Next is personal appeals. So you might appeal to someone's, you might appeal to the fact that, hey, we're friends, we like each other, we get along, and that is very influential, and it can make sure that people identify and say, sure, I'll help you out because you're my friend. The challenge, though, is that it can jeopardize the friendship, right? So work relationships a lot of times can evolve into not just a work relationship, but also you genuinely like each other, or you genuinely have a great personal relationship where you talk about more than the tasks and the work that you need to get done. And obviously, if you use that personal appeal, it can kind of chip away at that friendship. So you have to be careful. And you really make sure that that's what you're willing to do is potentially jeopardize that relationship. Another is pressure. And this is when you use coercion or persistent follow-up. And you're just constantly trying to get people to make a commitment and being almost to the point of annoying and just to get it done and push people in a direction. I think pressure is probably used a lot in sales, especially when they know that there's a lot of leads coming in and they're not going to be at a big disadvantage if one person says no. So they just want to crank through it. This happens a lot of times with, I've been on many calls where, there's sales representatives that are at big companies and they have some technology solution that everybody wants access to, and they just push people through 15-minute, 30-minute sales calls, and they will make the ask at 15 minutes and they will push for, are you going to buy this? And when is the next meeting? And it's a pressure tactic. And it can work. I mean, it can make sure that you're getting answers and getting things done, but it can also rub people the wrong way and might actually create resentment. So if you're getting lots of pressure or you're using lots of pressure, be careful. You have to use it wisely. The next one, rational persuasion. So this is just when you're using logic and facts. You're using your brain to explain to people why this is important, what are the outcomes, giving people evidence, giving people data to understand why you're doing it and why it's important and what the impact will be. And so of all of the 9 influence tactics that we talked about, this is the only one that never hurts. So all of them have a downside, except rational persuasion. So what does that mean? You should always try to use logic and facts and evidence to persuade people to do whatever you think is appropriate. And that is the number one influence tactic. Now, obviously reality can set in, and sometimes that's not enough, and you feel passionate about getting done whatever you need to get done, and that's just life, and you have to balance that. And then you might start to think through, well, what influence tactic makes sense next, and then thinking through the pros and cons of those to decide what is ideal given your situation. Okay, so keep in mind, right, leadership is influencing others towards collective goals. And so we just offered a variety of very specific influence tactics, but now leadership really is a collection of behaviors and it does have to do with that relationship or that influence process of the leader to the follower outcomes. And so the most contemporary way to evaluate leadership now is to evaluate leadership styles, which are essentially collections of behaviors. And then they kind of break it down into very specific types of styles based upon a certain type or a certain collection of those behaviors. And so there's all sorts of different ways to evaluate leadership, whether it be a trait-based approach or a skill-based approach, or trying to understand what's the best leadership style within certain contexts, which we'll also talk about later, such as, what's the best way to be a leader within a crisis, or within when dealing with diversity, or when dealing with teams, right? Those are all very specific contexts. Now we're going to talk about specific styles or collections of behaviors. And probably the most popular one for about 30 years through the 80s was called Transformational Leadership. And Barack Obama was a great example of somebody that was categorized as a transformational leader. It involves, number one, being inspirational, and so motivating others and using some of that inspirational influence. The whole "yes, we can" message was part of his platform for getting elected. It also is about being considerate, so thinking about the needs of all parties, thinking about what exactly does my party need and other party needs, so kind of seeing the big picture and doing their best to engage in perspective taking. He was actually kind of bonked on the head by his supporters quite a lot for almost being too considerate of the other side and not being forceful enough in his decision making for his Democratic Party, for example. But then others would say, well, that was just him being a transformational leader. He was trying to engage in perspectives taking for all. And then finally is intellectual stimulation. And this is the idea of trying to provoke thought, not just telling people this is the way it should be done, but trying to help people grow, develop, and think for themselves. And Barack Obama also was kind of pinpointed as his leading style being very professorial, where he was trying to get people to think for themselves and think about these issues from a higher order perspective. So transformational leadership, that's the first one. And it actually evolved. It was more so about being charismatic at first, where that was more about being inspirational and being idealistic, thinking about values. And then it evolved also to start to include things such as individual consideration and intellectual stimulation. And so once those dimensions were added in, then it became more so about transformational leadership and not just charismatic leadership. And then there's also what's called transactional leadership. And transactional leadership is basically just a reciprocal exchange. Hey, I'm going to pay you X annually, and in return, you are going to do for me task A, B, C, D, E. Now, that's a very oversimplified example, but that's essentially what transactional leadership is all about. I have the authority, this is kind of leveraging this position power and legitimate power in particular to say, I'm going to ask you to do these things and I need you to do them in order for you to get paid or in order for you not to be fired. And so it's that approach of being reciprocal. And transactional is not necessarily a bad thing, right? There's plenty of jobs and there's plenty of circumstances where, you don't necessarily have to be all inspiring and inspirational. People just want to know, what's the arrangement? What's the deal? How much are you paying me? And, I will get it done and I want that money, or something along those lines. It's a very simple transaction and it works just fine. It can be very efficient and it can be very fair as long as both parties completely understand what that reciprocal exchange is. They've done some comparisons of transactional and transformational leadership. And interestingly, it's relatively similar, and transformational leadership tends to be a little bit higher effect on employee maximal performance, but satisfaction with leadership seems to be actually a little bit higher on transactional than for transformational, because transactional, again, is you see what you get type of thing. A great example, Bill Belichick. So as the head coach of the Patriots, his leadership style was very much, here's what you're going to do. If you want to be on this team, this is what you have to uphold. This is what you have to participate in, right? Signing off on all these very specific approaches to being part of the team and mindset, and everything was just very scripted on, here's what I want. my team is awesome and we're going to win a championship. And if you want to be a part of it, this is what you need to do. And you can therefore get paid for it, and you can potentially win lots of games and get lots of accolades. But these are the rules that I'm offering. Be a part of it or you can leave. And there's been lots of great athletes that have been part of the team who either aligned or did not align with that whole mentality that the head coach had set forth. So that's a transactional leadership example. Now, charismatic leadership, this is kind of the foundation of what transformational leadership eventually became, where it was really more about having charisma, having personal zeal to be able to get people to react emotionally and get excited about this ideological message. And Nelson Mandela was a great example of a charismatic leader. He was just a great speaker. He could connect with people. He was a great storyteller. He had this mission that was just so powerful and important, and he had this great story to tell to be able to get people pumped up and inspired about saying, yeah, he's right. This is the way that society should operate. And so charisma is great, and it's important, but it also can be potentially not as useful as other leadership styles if there's no follow through and if there's no organization behind it, and if people think it comes across as inauthentic. But some people it works very well, especially when you're trying to get people to be on board with an important social cause. Next is ethical leadership. And ethical leadership is about doing things that are not only about making sure people are ethical and not doing things that are unethical. It's also about focusing on the process more so than the product. And what I mean by that is ethical leaders care a lot about how things are done. And they care about how things are done even more so than they care about the outcome of the process. So a leader, of course, is going to be very focused on objectives and say, you need to accomplish these goals by this specific time and you need to get it done. But if you take that to the extreme and say, get it done at all costs, that's more of a bottom line leadership mentality, which can be dangerous because people start trying to hit those goals and they might try to do that by cutting corners and doing things they're not supposed to do. The ethical leader says, no, just do the right things, work hard, and do your best, and everything else will take care of itself. So they care about the process, not necessarily the product. And so that's really getting at this idea of a moral manager. And then the moral person and they also are just representing that they do the right thing at work as well as in their personal life, which is interesting. So ethical leadership is obviously a work-related construct, but there is some items within the ethical leadership questionnaire that's specifically getting at the fact that, is this just a good person in all aspects of life? The theory being that you can't just show up to work and be ethical, but not be ethical in your personal life. You don't have dual personalities. You are one person, you just so happen to be floating around from different contexts. And so the ethical leadership influence comes across in a variety of different ways. Number one, this idea of social exchange. So if someone's good to you and they're fair to you and they're honest with you, transparent with you, there then becomes this social exchange. You also feel obligated to do the right thing for them, right? So it just perpetuates this reciprocal relationship of being ethical and being moral in the relationship with each other. And so that's at this reciprocity norms, right? So once the process is started of, hey, I'm going to try and do the right thing for you as a follower or as an employee, and I stand for morals and I stand for values, then this social exchange and reciprocity norm starts to go into motion. I put Tony Hsieh in here as an example who passed away recently, and I've been talking about Tony Hsieh and ethical leadership for years. A lot of people really appreciated Tony Hsieh's approach to being a leader and manager. He cared a lot, and a lot more than most executives, about the people within his organization and their well-being. And he used this approach called a holacracy. And we'll talk about this later when we talk about shared leadership and distributive leadership, where essentially no one really was superior to anybody else. Everyone was a peer. Everyone was an associate. Everyone was just a team member, and nobody was in a position power above others. And this kind of set in motion this culture of we do whatever it takes to take care of our clients and our customers, and we do whatever it takes to respect each other's differences. And so he had this really strong presence of saying, it's just be a good person and do hard work and do the right things, and everything else will be fine. So, he did crazy things, like he gave his employees, he encouraged his employees to stay on the phone with their customers as long as possible. And so there was some pretty crazy stories of people staying on a phone line, a customer service phone line with their customers for literally over 24 hours, right? That's just insane. That's just so cost inefficient. But he so much was an advocate for just do whatever it takes to help the client, help the customer, and help each other as a community, that he started to get this these accolades as being an ethical leader. All right, next is servant leadership. And it is this idea of serving others first, serving specifically your employees first, and then everything else will fall into place, right? So as a leader, my job is to help you in doing whatever you need to get done and accomplishing your goals. And so it has to do with being empathetic and trying to get into the shoes of employees and saying, what do you need? And it also is a matter of being a good steward of the community or the organization that you're embedded within, and doing whatever it takes to help the larger whole. And Herb Keller is a great example of servant leadership, former CEO of Southwest Airlines. And his mantra was that as a leader, his job was to serve his employees. He literally said, I will do whatever it takes for you to be successful. You need more resources? Great. You need more flexibility? Great. You feel like you're not getting paid enough? You tell me what's fair. And so he was going to do whatever it took to serve his employees. And then all the best employees, of course, wanted to work for Southwest. The most talented employees, the most independent and autonomous employees that could get stuff done. And then from there, he said, I am going to give you free rein to do whatever it takes to make sure that the customers are also being served. So the way that he ensured profitability was saying, I'm going to serve the employee first. Whatever you need in order to do your job really well and to be happy, you got it. And then in turn, those employees took care of their customers. And then when the customers are satisfied and they're happy, then they help the organization because they're coming back and they're consistent customers. I flew on Southwest for 9 months straight, Monday through Friday. I would leave on Monday morning from Indianapolis, and I would fly into Maryland in Baltimore, and then I'd fly back Friday afternoon for 9 months straight, trying to help set up a new sales territory in a former life. And I was on Southwest Airlines every single time, and it was fascinating to see the level of detail and how much interest they took in the customers. I literally knew all of the people on that flight because it was pretty much the same people every single time on that were working on that flight, and a steady rotation of similar pilots and everybody else that worked there. And so it was really fascinating to watch this unfold. But yes, servant leadership can work. The challenge, though, is that there's always what's called a servant leadership paradox, and that at some point, leaders might need to step up and say, I have to do something that you might not like, employees, because of the bigger picture or because of stakeholders or shareholders or something like that. So it's almost, to me, more of like, it does manifest in behavior, but it also comes across as like a theory. It's a philosophy. But there will always be circumstances where in order to serve your employees, you have to do things that they might not agree with. So that's kind of a strange paradox. Another is authentic leadership. And so authentic leadership has 4 dimensions, and it is about not just being your true self, which is, I think, what a lot of people think about when they hear authentic leadership. Certainly that's part of it, but it also is about your interactions with other people. So you are self-aware of your situation and you're authentic about how you're feeling and how you're doing and what your preferences are. And then you also engage in what would be called balanced processing, in that you are willing to take in new information, even if it doesn't necessarily jive with what you think is correct or what you think is the right thing to do. You're very balanced. When you get new information, you genuinely consider all of that new information, and you're kind of engaging in empathy, but more so kind of perspective taking at a more granular level. And then from there, you're transparent about what you think. And you're having these conversations, these relational interactions that are honest and open and evidence-based. You're not hiding behind anything. You're not trying to manipulate anybody. You're just being authentic in those interactions with others. And so then that's where the fourth dimension comes in of this internalized moral perspective, where you're trying to do the right thing. You think it is important to have balanced processing and engage in relational transparency. One example I really like, Coach Anthony, the former head coach of St. Anthony's, coach, what was his name? I forget what his name was off the top of my head, but this former head coach of St. Anthony's, he was considered extremely authentic, and he was he's in the Hall of Fame for high school basketball coaches. St. Anthony's was by far one of the best high school teams ever, and the way that he did it was ensuring that everybody understood, this is how I operate, this is me, this is my true self, and how I'm going to be a coach. And he was actually supposed to, he got an offer for Xavier University, turned it down. He got offers to be on NBA coaching staffs, turned him down. To be a high school coach, getting paid literally nothing. I mean, maybe a couple $1,000s to be the head coach, while he was also paying his bills by working, I think, as working in security or something like that, for his day-to-day job. And so his mission was to help and to try and help this specific neighborhood, his hometown, that was lower socioeconomic status. And he was genuinely saying, I'm here to help basketball players turn into better citizens. I'm here to help them get a new opportunity to get a job, to get off the streets and make an impact out there in the real world. And so he was just very authentic about, I am here to be a mentor, to help people succeed, and I'm not taking any. He also was very autocratic. He was a little bit hardcore, and he played by his own rules, and he wasn't going to take any flack from anybody, including the school. And so he refused to do fundraising. He refused to take other offers because he knew exactly what he wanted to accomplish. And he was transparent in everything that he does. And he was very self-aware as well, in that he knew this is his life and he doesn't want anything other than that. So that's a fun example of authentic leadership. Another, maybe the newest or the most contemporary of the contemporary leadership styles is mindful leadership. And mindful leadership has how many? 9 dimensions. And mindfulness is this idea of present moment attention, non-judgmental present moment attention. But there's also been a lot of evaluation of mindfulness, this state that can also be evaluated as a trait, your tendency to consistently be mindful at any one given moment. And then from there, it has really been picked up strong in the workplace. And so people are saying, what are the benefits of being mindful in the workplace, of constantly being present and attentive and non-judgmental? And then from there, it's gotten a lot of interest within the leadership literature. So people have started to say, what does a mindful leader look like? So someone that is typically high in trait-based mindfulness, and they're in these leadership roles, or they're engaging in leadership influence, what are the behavioral manifestations of someone that is high in mindful leadership? And so the dimensions are as follows. Number one, they're very present. Whatever they're working on in their dyadic interactions at that specific time, that's what they're focused on. They're also aware, very similar to self-awareness within the authentic leadership literature, talking about they understand who they are. They might even also be other aware. They understand who the other people are, and they're being very in tune with the affective tone of the conversations and how they're coming across. They're also very calm because they're present moment attention and not judgmental. They might feel as if they need to react to some stressful circumstance, but they can still self-regulate and remain calm. Relatedly, they can stay focused. So not just focused on the day-to-day, but also focused on what exactly is the mission and what am I trying to accomplish given my role as a leader, right? So not necessarily being all over the place and kind of being scattered, but being a very focused direct attention on what they want to do. And then also being very clear on what is important. So they're focused, they have the right direction, but they also have clarity on what they want to accomplish, whether it is at the dyadic level, with their team, with the organization. They've thought it through, and they're very in tune with what exactly they're trying to do and what is important and why. And then they also have what's called equanimous. They accept what is. So it's very easy, and we get caught up in this all the time, to try and dwell on the past and something that has happened that has made life harder and more complicated. But mindful leaders would say, it is what it is, and I'm focused on trying to solve this problem. I'm focused on the future and trying to move forward. They don't spend a lot of energy or wasting time on things that they can't control, right? So work on what you can control and forget the rest is kind of the mantra. And then the next one is positive, right? So recognizing that negativity doesn't help. We know it doesn't help, but the ability to self-regulate and ensure that every tone and every conversation and every direction is more positive as opposed to negative. And also being compassionate. And so this is getting at this almost this sense of servant leadership, but and understanding that people are they're human beings, they're not robots, and that we need to be respectful, we need to be empathetic. And then finally, I don't really like the word impeccable, but what they mean here is essentially getting a moral aspect, this idea of integrity and honesty and trying to do the right thing for everybody that's involved. So my favorite example is probably John Wiener, is the CEO of LinkedIn. He talks a lot about how he can be a compassionate manager. And I think a lot of this is really similar to the mindful leadership literature and talking about being present, being aware, the interactions with others, being equanimous, being positive, all of those things. And so if you do some Googling on John Wiener, you'll see him talk about like what's the right way to be a manager, what's the right way to be a leader. And he's very focused on, control what you can control, give people the honest opinion, and be calm and be fair, and everything else will take care of itself. And so his approach to leadership and being a manager is very much in that mindful space, and it's a good example of that. I think that's the last leadership style or approach. Okay, so that's all of the different styles. We've talked about the different influence tactics. We've talked about the different types of power. Now, contingency theory is this recognition that when looking at different approaches to leadership or styles of leadership, there is no perfect one way to do it. So we've talked about contingency approach and the contingency theory in general for all sorts of organizational phenomenon, but there's also a specific version of this for leadership. Okay, and so in this specific version of leadership, it says there's 3 factors that you should be paying attention to. And I talked about this in the introduction to the class a little bit, but I want to bring it back because it fits in with this leadership content. Number 1, in order to determine what is the right thing to do, or the ideal form of leadership, or the ideal approach to leadership or influence at any one point in time, you have to think about, number 1, who you are as a leader. What are your skills? What are your abilities? What are your competencies? What are your values? What are your traits, right? You have to act within a range of what you feel comfortable with. If you get too far outside of your zone, it's going to come across as inauthentic. You got to be you. But at the same time, sometimes the situation dictates that you flex a little bit, and maybe you're getting into some of the things that you aren't as comfortable with. So that's the first decision. The second decision is recognizing that your leadership is going to be within some type of relationship with another party, with the followers. So, are you engaging in leadership influence with one person? What are the characteristics of that person? What do they want to accomplish? What are their motivations? What's the context about that specific individual? Whether it's about their characteristics, their preferences, motivations, all that good stuff. And then it gets even more complicated because maybe then you're influencing a group of people, 2 people, or an entire organization. So what is the collection of followers can make it even more complicated, because then you're looking at the profiles of not just one, you're looking at a profile or an aggregation of many followers all at once. And that might also change the nature in which you want to influence others or lead others. And then the third is the situation. So that is more just a overarching category for the context. And so the context might be, what is the organizational culture? What is the organizational structure? What industry are we in? What's the timing, right? Is this something that's happening that needs to happen soon, or is this a long-term thing? Is this a company that's only been around for a month or that's been around for 200 years? Those are all situational elements that might play a role in this decision of what's the right way to lead. And so one way to think of this is all three of these variables are working together. You might say, well, the leader could be the independent variable, and the follower and the situation are two moderating variables that are influencing the nature in which leadership may or may not work, depending upon whatever the outcome of interest is. But the ideal leadership approach is going to be somewhere in this Venn diagram where all three interact, right? So the challenge for you as leaders is saying, at any one point in time, I have to be aware of my own stuff as a leader, but I also need to be constantly evaluating the situation and the followers within this situation to decide at any one point in time, what's the right thing to do? What's the right way to lead, influence, or flex my power? All right, so the discussion question that I offer is getting at this idea of contingency leadership. And so in your write-up, what I want you to talk about is, can a business executive be an effective president? And we've seen this over the course of time. For example, Donald Trump was a business executive who became the president, which is a very different situation. It's a very different context. Every year you see business executives that run in the primaries and attempt to be on the ticket. Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, for a while was considered. Bloomberg. I mean, there's so many. Every year, there's at least one or two or a handful that they're being evaluated in the mix. So I think this is a fun question to get at this idea of contingency theory. So think about these three factors: the leader characteristics, follower characteristics, and think about, who are the followers within a political environment, or who are the followers of a president? Is it Congress? Is it society at large? Is it everybody? Is it all the individuals that are on their staff? Is it just the people within the country? Like, who exactly are the followers? And then what is the situation? What exactly is the context in which this leadership of a president is going to unfold? Think about all those different characteristics as well. So that's the charge. Can a business executive be an effective president? And really kind of flesh out and think through the pros and cons of whether that's possible and why it's possible and what you think. This would be a good practice on flexing that contingency approach thinking. So good luck, and thank you very much.